My daughter Lily was never like other kids. Where most children chased each other through the grass or shrieked with laughter, she'd sit alone, her nose buried in a book or her gaze lost out a window. She wasn't shy, just different, content to drift in her own quiet world. My husband, Tom, and I didn't mind. We figured she'd find her way when she was ready. 3 years ago, when Lily was 6, we moved to a small town called Harrow's End, lured by Tom's new job and the promise of a slower life. The house we bought was old, a sagging relic from the 1800s with warped floors, peeling paint, and windows so tall and narrow they seemed to swallow the light. It smelled of dust and forgotten things, but Lily loved it. She claimed the upstairs bedroom with its crooked walls and a view of the gnarled oak tree out back, its branches clawing at the sky. For a while, everything felt right, peaceful, even. Then she started talking about the tall friend. It was a Tuesday night, the kind where the air hangs heavy and still. I was tucking Lily into bed, her small frame swallowed by a quilt my mother had sewn. She looked up at me, her brown eyes wide and unblinking, and said, "Mommy, my tall friend came to the window again." Her voice was flat, like she was reciting a fact. I forced a smile, assuming it was one of her imaginary games. She'd invented companions before, Mr. Whiskers, the cat only she could see, or Princess Ellie, who ruled an unseen kingdom in her closet. "That's nice," I said, brushing her hair back. "What's he like?" She didn't smile. "He's really tall. Taller than Daddy. And he doesn't have a face. He just watches me." A cold prickle ran down my neck, but I laughed it off. "Sounds like a funny dream," I said, kissing her forehead. She didn't argue, just stared at the window as I turned out the light. That should have been the end of it. Kids say weird things, they weave stories out of shadows and half-remembered nightmares. But a few nights later, I woke to a sound that clawed its way into my skull, a faint, deliberate tap-tap-tap, like fingernails raking glass. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, a rhythm that refused to fade. Tom slept through it, his snores a low rumble beside me. I lay there, eyes tracing the ceiling, telling myself it was the house settling or a branch brushing the roof. But the oak tree was too far from our bedroom, and the night was windless. The tapping grew sharper, insistent, pulling me out of bed. My bare feet hit the cold floor, and I crept down the hall, the sound guiding me like a beacon. It was coming from Lily's room. Her door creaked as I pushed it open, the hinges whining in the dark. She wasn't asleep. She sat upright in bed, her quilt pulled around her waist, staring at the window. The curtains hung limp, parted just enough to frame the oak tree's twisted silhouette against the moonless sky. "Lily?" I whispered, my voice barely a breath. She didn't move. "He's here," she said, soft and certain. "My tall friend." My pulse hammered as I crossed the room, the floorboards groaning under me. I gripped the curtains and yanked them shut, the fabric rough against my palms. Nothing was out there, just the tree, its branches still as death. "It's the wind," I said, though I knew it wasn't. "Go back to sleep." She sank down without a word, but her eyes lingered on the covered window, glinting in the faint light from the hall. The next morning, she acted normal, quiet, sure, but normal. She sat at the kitchen table, coloring a picture of a house with black crayons, the windows jagged and empty. I asked about her tall friend, hoping she'd giggle or shrug it off. "He comes when it's dark," she said, pressing the crayon harder. "He likes to watch." Her tone was hollow, like she was repeating something she'd heard too many times. Tom laughed when I told him later, his coffee mug steaming in his hand. "She's got an imagination," he said. "Probably saw a shadow and made up a story." I wanted to believe him. I tried to. But that night, the tapping came again, louder, closer, like it was testing me. I grabbed a flashlight and stormed outside, the grass wet and cold against my feet. The yard was empty, the oak tree a hulking shadow under a sky thick with clouds. I aimed the beam at Lily's window, my breath catching. For a heartbeat, I saw it, a long, thin shape pressed against the glass from the inside, its edges blurred and wrong. I blinked, and it was gone, leaving only the reflection of my own pale face. After that, Lily changed. She stopped sleeping through the night, her bed a tangle of sheets by morning. I'd find her sitting up, staring at the window, her lips moving in a whisper I couldn't catch, just a low, lilting hum that made my skin prickle. One afternoon, I found a drawing under her pillow, a stick-thin figure, its head scraping the paper's edge, arms dangling past its knees, no face, just a blank oval. "That's him," she said when I held it up, her voice eerily calm. "He's nice." But her eyes were dull, like she didn't believe it. I started closing her curtains tight, knotting them so she couldn't peek. It didn't matter. I'd come back to find them parted, the knots undone, her small fingerprints smudged on the glass. The tapping grew relentless. It wasn't just at night anymore, it followed us into the day, faint but constant, like a heartbeat in the walls. Tom heard it too, though he pretended not to. One evening, he lost it. Lily wouldn't eat, just sat at the table pushing peas around her plate, her gaze fixed on nothing. "Enough of this crap," he snapped, storming upstairs. I trailed behind, my stomach churning. He ripped the curtains down, the rod clattering to the floor, and froze. A long, jagged scratch marred the outside of the windowpane, running from top to bottom, deep enough to catch the light. It hadn't been there yesterday. "What the hell?" he muttered, his voice cracking. I stepped closer, my breath fogging the glass. The scratch wasn't random, it curved faintly, like the outline of a finger. "Maybe a bird," Tom said, but his hands shook. That night, we moved Lily to our room. She slept between us, her stuffed bunny clutched tight, and for once, the tapping stopped. I let myself hope. It was a lie. 3 nights later, I woke to silence, thick, suffocating silence. Tom's arm lay heavy across me, but Lily's spot was cold. My chest seized as I bolted upright, calling her name. No answer. I stumbled into the hall, the air stale and heavy, and saw her. She stood at the far end, facing the big window we never opened, its frame warped and black with age. She was on her tiptoes, swaying like a puppet on loose strings, her nightgown brushing the floor. Her arms hung limp, and her head tilted slightly, as if listening. "Lily!" I shouted, my voice raw. She turned slowly, her face caught in the moonlight, eyes wide, pupils swallowing the brown, lips parted in a faint smile. "He's outside," she whispered. "He wants me to let him in." I lunged, grabbing her wrist, her skin clammy under my fingers. She didn't resist as I dragged her back to our room, slamming the door. Tom woke up, bleary and pissed. "What's going on?" he growled. I told him, my words tripping over each other. He checked the window, came back swearing nothing was there. But I saw the sweat on his brow. I couldn't take it anymore. The next day, I called Sarah, a friend who'd lived in Harrow's End her whole life. Her voice tightened when I mentioned the house. "You know its history, right?" she said. "The man who built it, Elias Crow, was a recluse. Tall guy, over 6'5", lived alone after his wife died in childbirth. Folks said he'd stand at those windows, watching the kids play, even after he was dead." My throat closed. "Dead how?" She hesitated. "Hung himself from that oak tree in '92. They sealed the place up after, said it felt wrong. I didn't tell Tom. He'd call it nonsense. But I kept Lily downstairs after that, away from her room. She seemed fine in the daylight, reading her books, her quiet self again. I almost believed we'd outrun it. Then came the night Tom was gone, working late. I'd fallen asleep on the couch, Lily curled beside me, her breathing soft and even. A sound jolted me awake, not tapping, but a low, keening hum, like wind through a cracked pipe. It was coming from her. She wasn't on the couch anymore. The hum grew, threading through the house, and I followed it upstairs, my legs trembling. Her bedroom door was ajar, the air inside frigid, sharp with the smell of damp earth. She stood at the window, curtains flung wide, her small hands pressed to the glass. Her breath fogged it in slow bursts, and she was tracing shapes, long, coiling lines that twisted into something I couldn't name. Outside, the oak tree loomed, its bark glistening wet in the dark. And there, pressed against its trunk, was a shadow, taller than any man, its limbs stretched and bent, head tilted like it was listening back. It didn't move, but its edges pulsed, seeping into the night. "Lily," I rasped, my voice breaking. She turned, her face slack, eyes black pits in the dim light. "He's not mad anymore," she said, her voice layered, like two people speaking at once. "He's lonely. He wants a friend." The window shuddered, a deep, bone-rattling thud that shook the walls. Glass splintered, the crack splitting wide, and I saw it, the shadow's hand, long and claw-like, pressing from the outside, smearing something dark across the pane. I screamed, lunging for her, my nails digging into her arm as I yanked her back. The floor tilted under me, and I ran, half dragging her downstairs, her body limp in my grip. The hum followed, echoing in my skull, until we burst outside into the motel parking lot across town. I didn't look back. We stayed there 2 nights, Lily silent, staring at the wall. I went back alone to grab our things, the house a hulking shape against the gray dawn. Inside, the air was thick, the smell of rot choking me. In her room, the window was shattered, shards glinting on the floor, the frame bent outward like something had forced its way in, or out. Her drawing lay crumpled beneath it, the tall friend's blank face smeared with a dark, sticky stain that wasn't crayon. I burned it in the sink before we left for good. We rented a place 10 miles away, a bright, modern box with no trees in sight. Lily turned 9 last month, still quiet, still herself. The tapping stopped, and she hasn't mentioned him since. But it's not over. Last week, driving past the old house, I saw the oak tree was gone, cut down, the stump blackened like it had been burned. Lily was in the back seat, her book forgotten, staring at the empty lot. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear, her reflection in the window pale and still. I sped up, my hands tight on the wheel. Later, I looked up the property online. The new owners had fled after 6 months, claiming the house watched them. The listing photos were stark, empty rooms, bare walls. But in one, Lily's old room, a shadow stretched across the floor, long, thin, faceless, cast by nothing I could see. I slammed my laptop shut, my heart pounding. At night, when the wind rises, I hear it again, tap tap tap, faint but growing, like it's searching. I check on Lily, asleep in her new bed, and pray it's not her it's coming for.